In the first of our business news podcasts, we'll be listening to an article on what companies can do to improve communication at work. After listening to the article, we'll then explain some of the key vocabulary and provide further examples of how these words can be used.
Good communication at work. An important factor in a company's success is good communication among its employees. The most successful companies have a network of informal and formal communication that the management supports. Although managers believe they have given clear instructions, often employees have failed to understand them. When managers give instructions, they should make sure that they have been understood correctly. Employees find it harder to communicate with other employees who have higher positions in the company. People of the same position may talk openly to one another about how things are going, but are less honest with someone higher up in the company. They often filter information and change the facts to tell the boss what he wants to hear. One way of reducing the distance between employer and employees is to cut down the ways in which employees can show their higher position in the company. In Japanese companies, for example, it is usual for all staff to wear the same uniform. Many companies have a common dining area for all staff. The office layout and the distance between employees can affect how well they communicate. The farther away one person is from another, the less often they communicate. Some research has shown that when the distance is more than 10 meters, the chance of communicating at least once a week is only 8%. If someone is less than 5 meters away, the chance of communicating at least once a week rises to 25%. Therefore, the office layout should be carefully planned. Open plan offices, for example, are designed for quick and easy communication between staff. One of the most important lessons for all managers to remember is that communication is a two-way process. They should always encourage their employees to ask questions, and they should always try to get feedback from their employees.
Today's article was about the importance of communication in a company and the things that a company and the employees can do to ensure good two-way communication among all players in that company. Now we're going to take a look at some of the vocabulary and how it is used in this article.
Yeah, okay, so the first word that comes up there is factor. A factor in the company's success. What they mean by factor there is a situation or something that influences the result of the company's success. So what's another way we could use that word, Jeff?
So you could say, for example, the performance of the economy could be a factor in the result of an election.
Okay, so that way what you mean is the economy is going to affect the outcome.
It's going to be one of the more important influences, a major factor.
A factor may be just one of many things that causes an outcome.
Usually there'll be more than one factor in play.
Okay, great. And then we're talking about companies having a network of informal and formal communication. Clayton, you're an engineer. Tell us what network means.
Yeah, a network, there's a technical description of a network which would be a system of parts. So a technical description of a network could be like a computer network, a number of computers tied together. In this case, they're really talking about people.
And how people interact.
Are communicating with each other.
Yeah, yeah. And then, informal and formal is the style of that communication, yeah?
Yeah, they both work the same way, but one has a more defined style of how communication is supposed to happen.
And that is formal?
Yes, a formal. So in other words, a president will communicate to the vice presidents who will communicate to their managers. That's a formal communication.
Right.
But I think one of the things we talked about in this article is that informal communication can be important as well.
Right.
For example,
yes.
when employees talk to each other,
Yes.
most companies are not going to have any special arrangement or special policy for organizing these things.
Very good. Yeah, it will just happen, and it is not known how it happens, but communication happens regardless.
But there can be certain factors that influence whether informal communication is more effective or less effective. We talked about things like seating arrangements in a company. If employees are seated close to each other, they're much more likely to have some kind of informal communication, at least once in a while.
Let's have a look at some examples how we could use those. Talking about network, informal, formal.
Well, I think a network, I think it's pretty clear, but talking about informal is not formal, not rigid. For example, hi is an informal way of greeting people as
Yeah.
opposed to hello, how are you?
Is more formal.
Would be a formal way of greeting people.
Okay, great. And moving on a little bit, they were talking about how people at the same level or position in a company talk more openly. So when we say people talk more openly, what do we mean, Jeff?
Well, it means that people are more comfortable discussing certain kinds of issues. If you talk to your boss or to somebody who is higher up in the company than you are, you might be more careful talking about certain things. You might be less open or less direct in some of the things that you say. But if you talk to one of your colleagues, somebody at the same level, you're more likely to be direct and more open about how you speak.
Okay.
Yeah, I think open means, in this case, not hiding anything.
Being honest.
Honest and also willing to share more data, more information.
Right.
Okay.
We also use the word filter in this context. We talked about how employees sometimes filter information when they talk to their bosses or to people higher up in the company.
Right. That's a better way of saying lie.
I don't think filter really means lie. It means not telling everything.
Right. A filter picks some things out and holds others back. So some things will
Okay,
get through the
yeah.
filter and some things don't.
Not telling the whole story.
Right.
So perhaps being very careful about
Yeah.
what you say.
Saying certain things and not saying other things that you don't think will help you. I think that relates to honest in a way. Honest is truthful, telling true things. If you're not honest, you are telling untrue things. You are lying.
Or you're not telling the whole truth. That would be a filter.
It's a fine line. Some people say that's not being honest. Some people saying that's just not telling everything.
Well, in English we have an expression, you want to tell the truth and the whole truth.
That's
Not
true.
just to say things that are true,
That's
but to
true.
be complete in what you say.
Yeah.
I guess everybody has to make their own judgment on that.
Yes,
Okay.
that's true.
And what about another way that we could perhaps use that phrase, filter?
Well, many times the people on TV have to filter the language to make sure that the language used can be used for all ages. There are certain words we should not use at any time, but sometimes we do, so we have to filter the language.
Perhaps at a press conference or a press officer tend to filter the information they give to the media.
They filter usually all the bad news.
They'll present information about the company, hopefully accurate information, but they'll present it in a way that makes the company look as good as possible.
Talking there too about reducing the distance, and so they can cut down a word, phrasal verb, really, that means to reduce. Quite often we say the company needs to cut down on spending
Spending, yes, we hear
Right.
that a lot
Yes.
in many companies,
constantly.
constantly.
Okay, and then there was an interesting thing there. They moved on, they were talking about the office layout, and Jeff, as you mentioned, how that can affect communication. And there was a phrase they used to describe the style of the office, the way the office is organized.
Yeah, we
open
talked
plan.
about we talked about open plan offices, meaning an office where there are no barriers or walls between the employees' desks. Some kinds of companies, especially Japanese companies, they tend to prefer open plan offices because they think that it creates a stronger relationship between employees and maybe encourages more communication. And there's some other kinds of businesses, like newspapers, for example. We usually have open plan offices because they want all of the employees to communicate as much as possible.
There is talking about the organization of the office, the fact that it's a large room with no walls dividing it into smaller offices.
Right.
yeah.
It used to be when I first started my career that people had private offices, and as individuals, we all liked them. But the trend has been to go towards more open plan, offices to improve communication.
And this is also a way of reducing the difference in levels between higher and lower level employees of the company. Usually a private office is something that only a very senior manager or a senior employee might have. If you have an open plan office, you're cutting down the emphasis on those differences.
And it improves two-way communication, which is our final phrase here.
Right.
Two-way means it goes both ways. We have many situations where, let's say, a boss will give many orders to employees but doesn't listen.
One way.
That would be a one-way communication.
It's important for a company's success for people at the higher levels to get information from the lower levels, not just to direct orders downwards, but to get feedback as well.
And that's important at all levels of a company.
Yes.
You could also say a negotiation is a two-way discussion. Both sides have something to information they want to share, and that information needs to be listened to by the other side if you're going to have a
Successful negotiation.
outcome. Yeah. Okay. And lastly, actually, Clayton, the final word there I'd like to talk about today is very popular in the business world these days, perhaps too popular. Feedback.
Yeah, feedback. As an old aeronautical engineer, we used feedback as a actual technical term to mean the electrical signal that tells you what changes there are in the system.
Okay.
But
So it used to be a very scientific term.
right, nobody used the term in business, but now it's all the rage. It's all very popular in companies to use the term feedback. And really, there's nothing wrong with it. All it is finding out what is the result of a change.
Okay. Could you say perhaps it's getting people's opinions or
I think so, yeah.
ideas?
In a business setting, what is the opinions about whether some change you've put in place is good or bad, or what are the results? What, say, statistical figures? Are sales up? Are sales down? Are people happier or they're not? All that.
Normally in a business setting, feedback will usually mean what people at lower levels think about decisions that are being made at higher levels. That's what gives the people in management some guidance about what they're doing and whether they're doing it correctly or not.
It's a form of two-way communication.
Two-way communication. Yeah. All right. Well, that's the end of our feedback for today. Thank you all for listening. And this is the first of our business news podcasts. We'd very much appreciate your ideas,
And your feedback.
So please write to us at businessenglishpod@mac.com. That's businessenglishpod@mac.com.